Rebel of Fox Hill by Marie Woodward. Chapter 1. October 1861. Fox Hill, Virginia. There were two of them. Yankees. Hannah recognized their unmistakable blue uniforms and the knapsacks and rifles on their backs as they traipsed through the forest. She had seen soldiers like them in Fox Hill before, marching in a show of force past her farm. Where were these two going? Perhaps they were on their way to see the ocean, which was only a mile or so northeast past the forest and marsh. She eyed the men warily as she cut the yellowing stem of a sweet potato vine with a knife. She tossed the vine aside, then wiped her flaxen hair from her eyes. Hands on her petite hips, she sighed. There was so much to do to keep up the little farm she and her mother owned, but so little time, so little help. The sweet potatoes needed to be harvested before the frost set in. The dilapidated wood fence and tall weeds around the property also needed her attention. Next to her, Moses, a stout young man with skin the color of rich coffee, cut away the vines with a large bowie knife. He hummed a tune that was unknown to her, but melodic and low, ending on a long note. "What's that song?" Hannah asked with a slight tidewater drawl. Moses gave her a smile tinged with sadness. "Something my pa used to sing to me when I was little." He spoke with a drawl like Hannah's, but his was as thick as molasses. His brow shone with sweat as he cut, and he wiped himself dry on the sleeve of his work shirt. It was a warm day for October, but Virginia weather was unpredictable. It wouldn't surprise Hannah if the frost came tomorrow. Hannah bent over the sweet potato plant, dug into the cool earth, then pulled out a potato covered in a layer of dirt. "When I was little, my father used to sing to me too. He had a smooth voice, like honey." She began to sing soft and slow. "Sweet is the midday sun, shining in the sky, frolicking in the meadows, chasing away the shadows. 'Tis sad to say goodbye, but goodbye is not goodbye." Hannah blew out her breath. "It's been too many years since I last heard his voice." "I can't remember my pa's voice," Moses declared, "just his words. I was yea high when he was taken away." Moses held his hand a few feet from the ground. "Our massa saw him and my big brother, and I ain't seen him since. All I got left of him is the song in my head. Mama sing it to me so I wouldn't forget. May she rest in peace." "Oh," Hannah replied, "I'm so sorry." There was a lump in her throat as she searched for better words to comfort him. Moses shrugged, but kept working. "One day, I hope I can see them again, when we—" All of a sudden, he stopped, his eyes locked on the forest. Miss Hannah? There's a couple of them Federal soldiers comin' this way." He pointed with his knife in his hand. Hannah groaned. "What do they want with us?" She rose and dusted off her hands on her apron. "Here, let's be done for the day. Make sure you take your share potatoes and go. I don't want the soldiers to give us any trouble over you." Moses nodded and filled a canvas sack with potatoes. Hannah crept through the field to meet the soldiers, stepping gracefully over the vines. She stuck her knife in a pocket of her apron, patting its skinny form as if to remind herself the weapon was there in case the men meant trouble. As she approached the soldiers, who didn't appear much older than she, Hannah called out, "What can I help you boys with?" "I'm Corporal Anderson, and this is Private Green," the taller of the men said gruffly as he came to a sudden stop. "I'd like to speak to the head of the household." Messy brown hair spilled out from a blue cap as he removed it from his head. The other man, Private Green, followed suit. In contrast to Corporal Anderson's smooth, chiseled features, Green was scruffy-faced, with short black hair and sunken cheeks and eyes, almost like a living skull. "Head of the household," Hannah repeated as she placed her hands on her hips. "Yes, don't you have a father?" Anderson asked. "Of course I do, but he's gone," Hannah replied. For a moment she was mesmerized by Anderson's striking green eyes. Remembering he was a Yankee, she broke her gaze. "Gone where?" Corporal Anderson asked. He looked around sardonically. "Fetch him for me. I must speak with him." "You'd have to dig him up to speak with him," Hannah said, giving him a half-smile. "But I don't think he's in much of a state to reply." "So is there a man here or not?" Private Green spoke. His eyes lingered on Hannah, who frowned at him and folded her arms in front of her chest, trying to block his gaze. "She means he's dead, Green," Corporal Anderson mumbled to his compatriot before scowling at Hannah. "Do you think this is a game?" His jaw clenched. "Who is the head of the household if your father is dead?" Hannah tossed her head back in the direction of the farmhouse. "My mother. I must warn you, however, that some people believe she is not right in the head." Anderson cleared his throat. "No matter," he said impatiently. "Take us to her. We've come to discuss a matter of importance." "Of course," Hannah said with a sigh. She gestured for the men to follow her, then led the way toward the little white house that, in years past, had stood much straighter and in better repair than now. "Mother!" Hannah cried as she pushed through the creaking back door. "There are some Federal soldiers here to speak with you." Hannah's mother did not hear, or perhaps did not want to hear. Hannah could not tell the difference. Mother met her with a wide grin. "We shall have a feast tonight." Mother's graying hair was pulled up into a loose bun, and her eyes sparkled with an innocence unusual for her age. "Fresh eggs and sweet potatoes. That calls for a sweet potato pie. It shall be perfect for Daddy's birthday." Hannah gave her mother a wearying smile. "Yes, Mother." It was exhausting pretending that Father was alive. Mother refused to believe he was gone. "Do make yourselves at home," Hannah said flatly as she held the door. Hannah cringed as the men tracked in mud and dried leaves from their boots. Once they were inside, she shut the door and followed behind. "Ma'am," Corporal Anderson said as he took a step toward Hannah's mother, who had her back turned away from them as she cracked an egg into a stoneware bowl. Mother looked at the men in surprise, then her face broke into a warm smile. "Oh, hello! Well, how do you do?" "I am Corporal Anderson, and this is Private Green. We are soldiers from the Union." Private Green wandered shamelessly about the room, rummaging through her belongings. Hannah's eyes flashed in anger when Green pocketed a small wooden cross that had been displayed on a table. "What are you—" Hannah began to scold, but Mother cut her off. "Hannah, could you fetch these men some bread and butter?" Mother asked, giving Hannah a nod. "Private Green, I believe, is looking for something to eat. Come, boys, sit on down." Mother motioned for the men to sit at the table, which they did. Hannah begrudgingly obeyed her mother and brought a plate of food for the men. Anderson broke off a piece of bread from the loaf. Hannah watched in repulsion as Green greedily took the rest of the loaf for himself. "Could you make us some coffee, Hannah?" Mother asked. "These men will need something to wash down their bread with, especially Private Green here. We wouldn't want him to choke on his meal. That's a lot of bread for one man to eat without a drink to wash it down." Green nodded in agreement. "Better than that hardtack the army gives us." Hannah busied herself with boiling water over the already lit stove. Why was her mother feeding these good-for-nothing Yankees her bread and coffee when that was the last of their rations? The bluebellies could eat dirt as far as Hannah was concerned. She was half tempted to fill their mugs with mud, no poison, if she could get away with it. "We've been placed here to watch Confederate activity at a sentinel post nearby," Corporal Anderson said. "Due to the convenient location of your property, perhaps you would be willing to house me and Private Green during this time. We just need a corner of your barn to sleep in. We have bedrolls. We don't need a bed." "But I'd like a bed," Green muttered. "You'll get a bed of hay with the animals where you belong," Anderson growled at him. "Speak for yourself," Green mumbled peevishly, crumbs falling from his mouth. Hannah placed the mugs of coffee on the table in front of the soldiers, then took a seat next to her mother. "There's room in the barn for the both of you," Mother said to the men. "Tonight we are having a special dinner. You're welcome to join us." "It is settled," Anderson replied with a nod. "We will be posted here indefinitely until we receive orders to vacate Fox Hill. Then we will take our leave, and you will never know we were here. We shall be no nuisance to you as long as you do not interfere with our operations and shall be respectful of your property. Private Green will be at his post this evening, but I shall be most grateful for a warm meal." Green angrily stuffed the last of his bread in his mouth. "Humbug." Anderson peered at him scathingly, then rose and extended his hand to Hannah's mother. "We shall be off then. Thank you." "Mrs. Sally Hawkins," Mother replied, shaking his hand. She nodded over to Hannah, who sat as still as a statue staring daggers at the men. "And Hannah, my daughter." Anderson bowed to them. "Mrs. Hannah, Mrs. Hawkins." Green rose as well, but took no initiative to shake hands. He nodded instead to Hannah, giving her a grin that made her flesh crawl. She felt like she was staring into the face of a demon. "Come along, Green," Corporal Anderson called. After the soldiers left, Hannah peeked at them from the window, then followed Mother back to the kitchen. "Yankees at our farm?" Hannah cried with a groan. "I worry—" "There's nothing to worry about," Mother interrupted. "Yankees or not, they are still people. They have families back home that worry about them, too. I'll have a word with Father. I'm sure he'll agree they deserve a good home-cooked meal and a warm place to sleep." "Mother, you're forgetting that Thomas was killed this summer by a Yankee." Hannah's voice quivered as she remembered the day she found out about her childhood friend's death. His sister Abigail, Hannah's best friend and old neighbor, had written to her from Richmond. Thomas had been like a brother to her, but now he and father were both gone. Mother touched her temples as if the memory was too much for her. She had loved Thomas like a son. You're right, but I don't think it's fair to hold a grudge against soldiers that had nothing to do with that. And did you see that soldier pocket our cross? He stole from us, Mother, and a heavenly symbol nonetheless. Let him have it. He needs it more than we do, doesn't he? Hannah opened her mouth to protest again, but her mother stopped her with a wag of a finger. No more talk of this, Hannah. It will only be for a short time, I'm sure. Defeated, Hannah sighed. Yes, Mother. That evening, as Hannah and her mother finished cooking, Hannah set the table with 4 plates. Mother always insisted on saving a plate for father at every meal. What would Corporal Anderson think having a birthday celebration for her deceased father? It didn't matter. He was just a Yankee. Mother, do you ever wish we had left Fox Hill before the Yankees came? Hannah asked as she half-mindedly placed the silverware on the table. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride, Hannah's mother replied as she fried chicken in a sizzling pot of grease. Yes, but life has been so hard since the war, after father died. Hannah cut herself off. It's been hard running the farm by ourselves. I'm glad Moses can help every once in a while, but I wish... Hannah sighed. I thought maybe I'd get married and my husband would help, but then all the men went to war and... She frowned. Now it's too late. If we had gone to Richmond like some of the other families, maybe things would be different. Maybe I'd be married. What's in Richmond for us? Mother asked. There's no reason for us to go. The Federal troops haven't bothered us too badly. Hannah shook her head. Sticking up for the Yankees, are you, Mother? I refuse to think that any Yankee can be good. Just take, for instance, that Private Green. What a vile man! You saw how he looked at me, didn't you? Well, there's always one bad apple, Mother said. She fumbled with a heavy log, trying unsuccessfully to shove it in the stove fire. Yes, and one bad apple spoils the bunch, Hannah said. Oh, here, let me get that for you, Mother. She raced over to take the log from her. This one could use more chopping. Hannah hauled the log outside, happy to be away from the heat of the kitchen. She placed it vertically on the ground at her chopping stump and picked up her axe. She lifted it high above her head and, Could you use a hand with that? She swung and missed. She turned to see Corporal Anderson standing there, shed of his knapsack but still carrying a gun. The amber glow of the setting sun made his brown hair shine like gold. I am perfectly capable of chopping wood myself, thank you, Hannah replied curtly. She lifted the axe, swung, and missed again. After the 3rd attempt, she handed him the axe with her eyes lowered. All right, here you go. You made me nervous standing there. Anderson set down his rifle and repositioned the log. Who taught you how to chop wood anyway? That's a man's work. My father taught me before he died. Mother and I do all the farm work ourselves. And you don't have slaves to help? Anderson asked, his eyebrows raised in surprise. He took back his gun and laid it on his shoulder. Just 'cause we live in the South doesn't mean we have slaves, Hannah said. You've never owned a slave? No. Then who was that man in the field with you? He asked. He's not a slave. Not anymore, at least. He ran away. I help him, he helps me. I don't believe in keeping a man locked up. I find that hard to believe, Anderson said as he raised the axe and in one smooth, swift movement brought it down squarely upon the log. Hannah bent and picked up the splintered pieces. Believe it. You're just saying that 'cause I'm from the Union, aren't you? You think that's what I want to hear? Why would I want to say anything you want to hear? Maybe because you're a Southerner trying to save your lying hide. I'm not lying. Hannah rolled her eyes. I don't know what they say about us Southerners in the North, but we're not all bad, you know. Neither are we, Anderson replied as he helped her gather the wood and transferred it to her arms. Well, maybe you're an exception. They stared at each other questioningly for a moment. Hannah found herself lost in his eyes again, then felt her face grow red. Dinner will be ready shortly, she said before hurrying back home. The savory scent of fried chicken drifted through the house. Hannah licked her lips as her mother dished up a plate for Corporal Anderson and placed it in front of him. There was nothing better than her mother's Southern cooking, but Hannah wasn't pleased to share it with this stranger. Her mother seemed not to mind. She had given him an extra serving. Thank you kindly, Anderson said. He removed a large bowie knife from his coat and stabbed it into a chicken thigh on his plate. Hannah gasped. In our home, Mother began, we always start dinner with a prayer. Anderson dropped his knife. Oh, of course. May I offer it? Mother asked. Anderson nodded. Grab hands, Mother said, reaching out toward Hannah and Anderson. Hannah took her mother's hand, then reluctantly grabbed Anderson's. His grip felt surprisingly strong and warm. Hannah bowed her head and tried to focus on her mother's prayer. "Dear Lord," Mother began, "bless this house and those who reside here. Bless this food. Bless the soldiers who fight on both sides of the war. May we all learn to live together in peace. Amen." Anderson reclaimed his bowie knife and took a bite of the chicken while Hannah and her mother folded their napkins neatly into their laps. Hannah glared at him in distaste. "Has he no manners?" "So, Corporal Anderson," Mother said, "where do you come from?" "Vermont," he replied in between bites. "Oh, I've heard of Vermont. A good place to farm, isn't it? Flat and fertile?" Mother said. "Unlike here. Too many trees to clear. Rains cats and dogs in September." Anderson nodded as he took his knife and stabbed it into another piece of chicken. "You are right, mostly. The trees have been cleared away, so there is lots of good fertile farmland there. Winter there is beautiful, white and serene. You don't have that here in Virginia. There is nowhere quite as nice as home." Hannah rolled her eyes. "Perhaps if Corporal Anderson enjoys Vermont so much, he should go back after the war." She cut up a fried chicken thigh on her plate and forked it aggressively. "That is the plan," Anderson replied, "when the North wins." "If the North wins," Hannah said under her breath. Mother cleared her throat. "Hannah, why don't you serve Corporal Anderson some more chicken? He finished his off so quickly, he must be starving." "No, thank you," Anderson said with a little wave. "This is quite enough." "Then you must have some pie," Mother said as she rose from the table. "Sweet potato pie made especially for today." "Yes, it's my father's birthday," Hannah said as she tilted her nose up. She hoped it was clear to Anderson that the celebration wasn't in his honor. "Here, you sit down, Mother. I'll get the pie for you." "I noticed the extra plate," Anderson said. "For him?" Hannah nodded. "It's a tradition." She served her mother first, giving her the lion's share, then served Corporal Anderson a much smaller sliver. "Give him another slice," Mother said, pointing to Anderson's plate. "He's a grown man." "I'm fine," Anderson replied. "You heard him, Mother. He said he's fine," Hannah said as she served herself a slice and returned to her seat. Mother shook her head. "Forgive her. It's been difficult since the war." "Understandable," Anderson said. "The war has changed all of our lives for the worse." "Has it, Corporal Anderson?" Hannah said. "It appears you have the spoils of war at your fingertips. Food that you didn't have to work for. Free board. I wish I could leisure about like you did today while Mother and I were plucking the chicken and cooking and cleaning." Anderson narrowed his eyes at her. "I'm not sure what you mean," he growled. "Living in enemy territory, sleeping in a barn is not my idea of leisure. There are many places I would rather be than here squabbling with you." Hannah mockingly threw her hand to her heart, as if Anderson's words stung like a bee. "Let us be civil, Hannah. This gentleman is our guest," Mother reminded. "Yes, Mother, but we are at war with him. There is no civility in war." Anderson stood and shoved his knife into his belt. "She is right, Mrs. Hawkins. We are at war. I'm a Yankee, you're rebels. We were born into a state of contempt for each other, not knowing who the other really is. And so it shall be that way forever and ever until one of us has the bravery to change it." He placed his blue cap upon his head and seized the rifle he had stowed near his seat. "I must be off. I can tell when I am not welcome. It's time for me to change post anyway. Good night, and thank you for the delicious meal, Mrs. Hawkins." "Here, take this for Private Green," Mother said, rising and pointing over to a little basket containing fried chicken. "We can't forget about him." Anderson grabbed the basket and tipped his hat to Mother. "Thank you for your generosity. It is much appreciated." He locked eyes with Hannah for a split second. His gaze burned with rage as he turned and opened the door to leave. After Corporal Anderson was gone, she wondered if he was right. Were they really born into a state of contempt? And if so, could they change it? Why would she want to? Anderson was a soldier who would be gone when the war was over. It wouldn't make a difference anyway.
You've been listening to The Rebel of Fox Hill by Marie Woodward. Please click the like and subscribe button to hear more of my audiobook. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you for listening.